This is an IWP media production, brought to you by the Institute of World Politics, the independent accredited graduate school empowering the next generation of national security, intelligence, and international affairs experts. Learn from top scholar practitioners and acquire invaluable skills to propel your career. For more information, visit iwp.edu.
Today our guest is Dr. Sara Vakhshouri, founder and president of SVB Energy International, a strategic energy consulting firm with offices in Washington, D.C. and Dubai, and also an adjunct professor of energy security at the Institute of World Politics. Sara, welcome to the podcast.
It's a pleasure, thank you.
Just to start out, maybe you could talk about what you teach here at IWP.
This is actually one of my favorite things to do, James. I'm always looking forward to the classes. It was, I think, back in 2018 when energy security was not yet a big thing because it really picked up, especially after the Ukraine-Russia conflict and war. But back in 2018, actually, IWP invited me to design a unique course for the students on energy security. And we have been, and I think we're still, the institution that teaches energy security. I have had really a pleasure of working with master students, doctoral students, and some of the thesis. And you know, the IWP students are from a very unique group, and I had students both working at very high-rank governments or just graduate students, and I'm very proud of what they did.
Oh, well, everybody loves your course, I know that. And yes, looking at energy as a tool of statecraft.
Yes.
Because energy is a very underrated thing when it comes to national security, but in fact it pervades everything, doesn't it?
Exactly. Yes, as you mentioned, like this is actually what we discuss in the class when we are looking and we're trying to think as an energy security strategist. We always look at it from the lens of energy and national security because there is a connection in all different aspects. There is a very close connection between energy, obviously the economy, military and defense, foreign policy, very close connection to food security, infrastructure, the critical infrastructure, and also end users. The thing that I always, when we talk to students, when I talk about electricity in the class, I always tell them, one thing I never want to forget after this course is that there is a direct connection between electricity and national security. And that's actually, we see that now that we're getting close to election, we see that the candidates, the former President Trump and his vice president have been kicked off a discussion over electricity actually in the US.
Oh, really? How has that happened?
So it's a very interesting dynamic because we have, so electricity is a secondary source of energy because we need first a primary source to produce electricity. But electricity is used everywhere from obviously the lamp. We're sitting here. We know how it's very tangible, its importance for us. But that's why it's connected directly to end users. So obviously it's very critical. You want to have a reliable source, but industries, definitely economy, everything connected, even the water purification, everything is happening with the power of electricity. However, in the United States, there is this discussion now happening that where we need that electricity, how much electricity we need, because we have President Biden's EV mandate that by 2030, all the United States cars should be EV, which needs obviously massive amount of electricity. You know, for all the charging stations, we need infrastructure to invest. However, we have another gigantic monster that needs energy, electricity in the US, and that's data centers and AI. We are sitting here next to us. Virginia is where 70% of global internet traffic passes. And in the discussion we had with electricity distributors in this area, What we learned is that only from data centers, not even AI, just the data centers, the amount of electricity they committed and signed contract to supply until 2034, this is just 2034, only for Virginia, they need additional 24 to 30 gigawatts of energy. If I want to put it in perspective, if they want to produce that only for North Virginia, we would need additional 26 to 30 nuclear power plant just for Virginia to supply that amount of electricity.
26 to 30 nuclear power plants. Amazing. And how many are we actually building?
That's a good question. Actually, we had our Secretary Granholm going and inaugurating one of our power plants, but we cannot build 26 to 30 nuclear power plant by 2034, and only for North Virginia, just for our data centers. So it's very important to think about different aspects of this story. Is like where we want that electricity to be used, number one, and number two is that where that electricity is coming from. And if you look at it with actually, like I like to emphasize, this is what I wanted to conclude, but it's maybe better to bring it at the beginning of our discussion.
Sure.
And that is the fact that energy and energy security, as you said, is a matter of national security. We need in the United States to have a national energy security strategy, national energy strategy. The same way that we have a national defense strategy is overlooked by Congress, is bipartisan. Because same as defense, for energy, we need long-term investment, we need long-term alliances, partnership, and infrastructure. So this cannot move and shift from one administration to the other administration. For instance, this administration discouraged our local domestic shale production. Even though under this administration we had the peak production, but the investment in shale production was discouraged until after the war and after COVID, when we had the energy crisis, which the administration was pushing the companies to produce more. So now going back to that electricity, we would need all our sources of energy to be produced. But at the same time, we need this to be sustainable, obviously, environmental friendly, and affordable. So that's why it's very critical to have that holistic national energy strategy that is overlooked from all different aspects of our system in the U.S.
Right. Well, since you mentioned environmentally friendly, part of the hostility to developing these sources of energy, and I'm thinking coal, natural gas, the shale oil, fracking, et cetera, has been the environmental aspect of it, that there's almost a roadblock there that says, no, we cannot no longer go down that road, we're only going to go down sustainable, clean energy, solar, wind, and whatnot. But as you point out, the same people who are talking about electrifying cars and other things don't seem to grasp that it would be impossible without having some other forms of electricity production other than solar, wind, and whatnot, which are still transition technologies. They're not there yet. So, I mean, how do we square that circle?
So this is actually a very interesting fact because what we call it is the energy trilemma. We need energy security, especially the whole world. It was like a wake-up call after the Russia-Ukraine conflict that we need a reliable supply sources and secure supply sources. But also this needs to be sustainable, obviously. We need it to be sustainable, environmental friendly, but affordable too, because inflation, global economy, all of it are dependent on the prices, and also access and equity that we need for everywhere in the world, because not everywhere in the world can pay for premium. Coming back to our country, we see that countries like, let's say, China, China's energy strategy doesn't change every day, every 4 years. They have this long-term view. So you see that in many aspects, in terms of vision and view, they have been ahead of us. They could be ahead of us because their strategy doesn't change. For instance, China did not retire its coal power plants. They are finding ways, for instance, to their finding ways to blend, let's say, 10% hydrogen, like ammonia, clean ammonia. They're finding ways to use all their domestic sources in a way that is sustainable, you know. This is something that in United States, we cannot say no to coal, no to oil, no to natural gas, which are local for us. And it's crucial for energy security of us, and not just us, our allies around the world, to say no to them. We need to produce them, however, in a way that is responsible and sustainable. A very good example of that is U.S. LNG and natural gas supplies to Europe after the Ukraine war.
Right.
It was U.S. LNG that mostly substitute the drop of exports from Russia to this region. So it's very crucial to look into for having, and this is what actually we practice, you know, at our class. Students have to choose a country, and we had the students choosing China and Russia, and they come with some very interesting understanding of the energy security strategy of those countries. Choose one country and think how we can create a resilient energy security strategy for that. And it's very interesting because the concept of energy security really rise from the time that Winston Churchill, at that time he was Lord of Admiralty, he decided to change the fuel of the British Navy from coal, which was domestic to Wales, to oil, which was imported at that time from Persia. So at that time, the concept of energy, national security, defense, you know, they were in war. They all start being integrated. And Churchill's solution at that time for energy security was diversification. So in our class, and even as a strategist, when we want to create resilience in our system, within energy system, we need diversifying that. So diversification is the key to create a resilient energy strategy. And that's what we need to have also as part of our national energy security or national energy strategy.
Fantastic. You mentioned the liquid natural gas. I know that, that came to the forefront, especially after Russia invaded Ukraine. I know that the Trump administration had pioneered that idea of replacing Russian LNG with American. And then the Biden administration got in the way of that, but then resurrected it when it became so obvious that this is what we needed to do. The Russians seem to be very adept at pursuing an energy strategy, since energy exports are one of their major ways of getting hard currencies. So maybe you could comment on what the Russians do.
This is actually fascinating because when the conflict begins, when the war between Russia and Ukraine started, many, at least in Washington, were hoping or expecting, and Europe, that Russia's export is going to drop significantly, both crude oil, natural gas, and fuel. This did not happen. And that's where forecast and accuracy of data is important. I just recently published a piece on that with Atlantic Council on how dominant narrative, data, and forecasts are important for our energy security. So I do recall that in March 2022, IEA, International Energy Agency, came with a forecast that from next month in April, Russian oil supply is going to drop about 3 million barrels per day. So this was their forecast, that we're going to have suddenly tomorrow 3 million barrels of no Russian oil in the market. And what happened right after that, President Biden's administration, he ordered a withdrawal of 1 million barrels per day of oil from our strategic petroleum reserves up to 180 million barrels. This was a historic decision, both in terms of magnitude and the speed of execution. Now, if you think about it, if you think about the connection between energy and defense, your adversaries know that how much of your strategic petroleum reserves have been released and for how many more days you have stored, let's say, oil for your defense, for your jet fighters. So this puts you in a vulnerable position. What happened Russian oil did not drop 3 million barrels per day.
Right.
That decision was executed, but the prices did not reduce significantly, And also the other part is the taxpayers' money, I know that President Biden administration, they sold the oil, let's say around 90, they say 95, that's based on their calculations. They say they sold the oil at $95. Now they are purchasing for refilling it at $75, so they made money. However, we should also know that at which price we purchased that oil. So anyways, there are very important factors. And why this happened? Because right after the war, when prices start increasing, which was also a consequence of change of administration, discouraging investment in our shale, and all of that, and COVID recovery, everything that happened, we had a shortage of supply. When and you said resurrection of policies, when President Biden administration came back to companies and they told them, now you have to produce, and whoever is not producing is not patriot. He said that. He said the companies in U.S. are not being patriotic, and they're just taking care of their own shareholders instead of producing more. It's important to realize that investment is long-term. No company would invest for next month because the president wants more production, and then after that discourage them. So that's why it's a long-term strategy, long-term view.
Yeah, that was interesting, kind of a switch from how, fossil fuels are evil and they're killing the planet to you're not a patriot unless you're, drill baby drill. So that was fascinating. With respect to Russia, it also shows the ineffectiveness of sanctions in trying to stop these things, because, correct me if I'm wrong, but the main result of that was just to give China a cheap source of oil.
This actually happened. So there were some, if you want to specifically focus on the sanctions on Russia, it's very interesting. So United States announced a voluntary sanctions on a ban on import of energy sources, any energy sources to come to United States. That's what Biden administration announced. So immediately Biden administration announced that there is going to be a ban, voluntary ban, and United States is not going to import any types of energy from Russia. It was not mentioned at that time that this excludes nuclear fuel. So in United States, we are having almost about 20% around then of nuclear power generation. The fuel partially comes from Russia. So here, if Russia would put US under sanctions and did not export those nuclear fuel to our power plants, what would happen to our electricity supplies? And the United States still continued importing nuclear fuel from that. And this is what we study in the class. Our student did lots of studies. It's very interesting because Russia even has stakes and shares in our uranium mine in Utah. And I published 2 papers with that with Oxford Institute for Energy Studies, not just our nuclear fuel, but a lot of nuclear isotopes that we need for imaging in medical purposes, for cancer treatment. Isotopes in our industries are only produced by Russia, supplied by Russia, and we are importing that from Russia. So this is, if we look at it, our own domestic impact on our country. Then we had different second layer of sanctions, which U.S. and European Union together, they tried to put a ban, to put a price cap on Russia's export. Why? Because there was not a substitute for sheer supply of Russia, and no one could afford not to live without Russian supply. So they said, okay, we will put a ban, a cap on the prices of Russia's energy supplies, and that way we would limit their income. Many people, including myself, warned the administration that this doesn't happen. You cannot put a ban on a commodity that a major supplier is exporting. Number one, because they are the exporters, you can't do that. And this is what happened. Russia said, whoever put a ban on my prices, I'm not going to export oil to them, or gas. The second thing is that how would you enforce that?
Right.
Could you go to India and show me the documents? Even if they show you the documents, are you sure that they purchased it at that price? So we see that now, and the interesting thing is that at that time, the cap that U.S. and Europe put on Russian oil was above what Russian oil was already traded. And now the prices are way higher than cap. So if you force Russia not to export, the prices would go higher, and you are basically stabbing yourself by bringing the prices higher. And the third aspect, what you mentioned, China, is that, well, Russia had to sell its oil at discounted level because now Russia is under sanctions. Who benefit from that? China, but not just China, India. And the interesting, funny story comes here that we were importing unfinished gasoline from Russia, which was kind of a blanket for our East Coast to produce gasoline. Also other fuel. But we are not importing them now from Russia. What is happening? Where are we importing them? From India? Where that oil comes to India is Russian oil.
Right.
Because now that Europe did not want to import Russian oil, we had a change of oil flow. The oil that was going before from Gulf producers, GCC countries, to China or Asia, India, now is going to Europe, and the Russian oil that was going to Europe now is going to Asia, which is China and India, and they benefit from that. And we are still importing a product, and Europe imports the product at higher prices because now transportation costs more. There's a higher prices because of sanctions on Russia at higher prices, but all of that is made from Russian oil.
These interconnections are fascinating. Policymakers respond to crises like Ukraine with these blanket pronouncements.
Yes.
But the market will. It will adapt, the market will adjust, and energy must flow. At the end of the day, you can't stop it.
No.
You mentioned the relationship to food security.
Yes.
Maybe you could talk some more about how that comes into the energy matrix.
Of course. So energy has, especially fossil fuel, oil and gas, we have also hydrogen. They are not only used in, let's say, our electricity, lamps or cars as a fuel, but also fertilizers. And fertilizers is fundamentals for, obviously, our agriculture, especially in industrialized agriculture, that they use a lot of fertilizers. We also have pesticides, which are chemicals, again, produced in petrochemical factories coming from, oil, gas, and other sources of energy. So when the prices, this is something interesting happened after COVID, that there hasn't been much investment in energy sources. And then right after that, we had demand picking up because of vaccinations. Supply did not pick up because of lower investment. We had the Russia-Ukraine conflict that exacerbated these prices and lack of shortage of supply. With all of that saying, when the prices of energy started picking up, the first thing happened in Europe, let's say in Germany, the fertilizers factories stopped functioning or reducing their capacity because they could not afford that price, or the governments had to reduce the supply of electricity to these factories. So that would have immediate impact on food security. There was at that point, right around the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the world was worried for the supply of food. What if India would say, I'm not exporting, wheat or rice because there is a conflict, or prices go high? And this is not just in industrialized economies and agricultures, but we also found this among areas that they don't have energy access. For instance, we did a study, and actually in our class, we had one of our students who dedicated his research on Madagascar. And while we were working, and we were working with government of Madagascar. We hosted them here at IWP because our students were working on that project. And what we learned is that the common understanding was that the forests in Madagascar is rapidly vanishing. So there is a very rapid deforestation happening in Madagascar. The common understanding was that this is happening because people don't have access to modern cooking sources, fuel like natural gas. They are cutting the trees, use that to create coal, and they cook on the coal. So lack of access to clean cooking is the cause for rapid deforestation. However, when we did all this research, we noticed something interesting. We noticed in Madagascar, the average consumption of fertilizer among farmers is much lower than the other countries around. And when we did more research, we noticed because of lack of access or lower access to fertilizer and pesticides, which are byproduct of energy sources, they are using a traditional way of agriculture, which is slash and burn. So they basically burn the whole area of, let's say, forest to nourish the soil and be able to plant. When the soil loses its nutrition, they do the same. So that is actually the cause of rapid deforestation. The other factor to food security, I want to say, this is another, in our country, sad realization I had when actually at IWP we hosted, if you remember, a group of farmers. And
Right.
I was stunned that why a group of farmers want to have a briefing on energy security. And in fact, during those few days that we were hosting them here, we had different briefings for them. I learned something very interesting that would actually be alarming. The farmers that we were hosting, I think they were from Kansas, mostly.
Yeah, the agricultural industry people.
Agriculture
yeah.
industry, they were major producers of our food in the United States and major exporters of food, dairy products, wheat, corn, meat. When we talk, and I asked them, why are you interested in this topic? They told me the incentives that the administration is giving, because the Biden administration created a lot of incentives for investing in every layers in clean energy. So farmers were approached, our farmers, in areas like, let's say, Kansas, which produces massive, like largest portion of our food in the US and also exports to the world. They were approached by solar farms that, would you lease your land to us to build a solar farm in your land? Because land is key for renewable energy, let's say solar and wind, because you need a lot of land. No, you need a lot of solar panels. So land access is key. And the farmers were approached by solar farms to convert their farms from whatever they were producing to become a solar farm. And when we were talking and when we go through the details of numbers, if I was a farmer, I would lease my land to those companies. Because it was risk-free. They would give me higher rent. I would not be worried for my crops or any risks that facing. So, but think about it. Some of the policies and incentives that policymakers set to encourage, let's say, one industry could harm another industry, which is critical to our national security, to our food security. So if all our farmers start thinking the best next risk-free business for us is to turn our land into a solar farm, what would happen to our own food security, but also global food security, because U.S. is a major supplier of food.
That is fascinating. So so solar panels taking farmland out of production, potentially raising food costs, and not necessarily producing the amount of electricity we need. And many of these solar panels are made in China. Correct?
Yes. That's another thing. So there are data that about 98% of process of solar panels panels and batteries are done in China, by China, somewhere that China owns that mines or processing that. Even most of the made in US batteries, made in US solar panels, they might have the last screwed, fixed in the United States. It still comes through the Chinese process. And if, something that worries me is that when we talk about clean energy decarbonization, we have a very biased way of calculating that carbon or that emission. When we look at let's say, when we compare two cars, a car that is EV and a normal, let's say, internal combustion engine car, we only look at the carbon produced at the point of exhaust, driving.
Right.
We don't look at the whole life cycle. If you look at that car, the EV, from the point of mining the minerals, processing that mineral, building that battery, and then decommissioning and recycling that battery, because recycling solar panel, recycling that battery is a way higher energy incentive. You need a lot of energy to use to recycle that. How much energy is used? How much emission is used? If you look at the whole life cycle analysis, both in terms of energy use and carbon emission, it might be way more than what we have already.
Oh, right. Plus the electricity generation to recharge the car.
Yes. And that electricity comes from somewhere. Electricity might, when you charge your car, maybe it's not at gas station, but that electricity may be produced from coal, maybe produced from nuclear. It comes from somewhere, because electricity is a secondary source of energy.
Right. Yeah, it is a much more complicated issue than simply, I plug in my car and everything's clean and happy. Yeah, because everything comes from somewhere. I read, I don't know if this is true, maybe you can enlighten me, that the energy it takes to create one of these large windmills, and to go through the whole process, including the recycling, that it doesn't actually create enough power to justify its 10-year life cycle. Is that true?
That's actually, the technology is becoming more efficient. However, this might be a very well case that the amount of energy, again, life cycle analysis, if we are not looking at the bias only where we like to look, if you look at the life cycle analysis of production of a wind farm or a solar farm, and then later decommissioning that, we might use more energy than that farm uses energy during its lifetime. And if you look at it in the United States, people can Google that, we call them wind turbine blade graveyards. We just dump them because it's so energy intensive to recycle them. These are all environmentally harmful. We need to cut trees. We need to convert our agricultural lands to a land that is utilized for solar panels. So there was this news, I think 2 summers ago, that I think in Scotland they cut billions of trees to produce a wind farm.
Amazing.
And this is actually, there was another interesting news, I think last week at Guardian, that biofuel power plant in UK that received $22 billion of subsidies, and green subsidies from government, taxpayer money, produce 4 times emission more than their coal power plant in UK.
Incredible.
So I think we need a more fair view and more broader view. And I think that, now green, I like to hear quote the Saudi energy minister once. He was saying that the green has become a religion.
Oh, yes.
It's become a religion.
Yes.
And we can't run a country, we can't have a national or global energy strategy running based on a religion.
Oh, certainly. The ideological rush to have these mandates and have government force this on everybody, despite life cycle analysis, like you mentioned, despite the need to, build nuclear power plants, and there's absolutely no plan to do that. I mean, they just look at the end result and then throw money at it. It's highly inefficient. It doesn't get to the goal, which, reducing carbon or increasing energy efficiency or what have you. And yes, because it's a religion, because it's ideological, and when you have premises that can't be questioned, then your policies have to follow.
And that's right. It seems to me that sometimes the policy is set before there's enough analysis or study being done to have that understanding. And this policy could, in long term, we might open our eyes and see we are heavily dependent on Russian nuclear fuel. We are
Right.
heavily dependent on uranium because, China owns majority of uranium mines around the world. Russia is doing majority of processing. About 40% of nuclear fuel is processed by Russia, And if you look at COP28, it's an international, part of Paris Agreement mechanism. If you look at COP28, is encouraging nuclear power generation to be replacing the fossil fuel or like other coal. Or if you look at it, okay, now other countries like Africa or countries in Asia, Middle East, everybody now wants nuclear power generation. Everybody wants nuclear reactor. Who is supplying that? If you look at it, who are the countries that have this technology? In US, yes, we are advanced in small modular reactors. But again, when it comes to fuel, who are the reliable and affordable sources? Russia. And also Russia offers now quickly to everybody loans on a capex, because nuclear power generation, the biggest cost is a capex to invest and build those reactors. Now Rosatom is giving every country that they want loan. They built that power generation for them. And nuclear, you know, is a long-term marriage. Forever, right. That country is a dependent on Russia for supply of fuel, for maintenance of that plant. So we are, with this religion, you know, with this faith that we have, we are pushing the whole world to be dependent on certain sources of energies that are sourced by only few countries. Because if you look at oil or natural gas, it comes from multiple countries, you know. So if one country, like if Iran is sanctions, if Venezuela is sanctions, if one country doesn't want to export oil, we still have multiple suppliers, diversity. But if we just want to push the world to using only certain types of energy, we are also creating a lot of dependence on very limited countries, but limited minerals, and now the world needs all those minerals. If you look at the prices of minerals, you know, if China is the only country or that has majority of those minerals, they could easily manipulate the prices. You know, we do not have a clear market like we have for oil or coal or natural gas. So again, I don't say we don't need these technologies, but we need to diversify and we need to use all of them in a responsible manner. It's very important to invest, obviously, in renewable technologies because it's important. But something here I want to say, no matter how efficient is our solar or wind farm generation, if let's say your efficiency is 100%, but if you get only 20% sun or wind, you only, that power, the whole farm that you use a lot of land and cut so many trees is only works at the capacity of 20%. But if you have a nuclear power generation or any traditional classic power generation, let's say natural gas power generation, coal power plants, they are producing between 98 to 100%. If they're producing less, it's because you need less electricity, let's say certain times of the year. Your peak load needs different level. But with wind and solar, depending on how much sun and wind you're getting, even if you put the highest technology, you will not still get the highest capacity of your power plant.
So when we look at nuclear energy strategy, clearly Russia and China know what they're doing. They're using their advantages to their advantage, whether it's the minerals or whether it's these relationships or their willingness to do things. There's nothing stopping the United States from being energy dominant in this world. We have plenty of resources, we have the technology, we have the know-how. What is stopping the United States from having a sensible, forward-leaning energy strategy that could work to our interest and perhaps even work to the disadvantage of some of our competitors?
Sure. So I would say the case that you mentioned about Russia and China, that they know what they're doing and they have a long-term vision, is because obviously they don't have a change of government the way we have here, because obviously we have a democracy and we change, our government changes, obviously. That's why I said I want to bring my conclusion at the beginning of our discussion. We need to have a national energy strategy that does not change, like our defense. Let's say we review it every 5 years. But Congress looks at it. It's a bipartisan. There need to be an agreement between everybody, and we cannot afford a president to come up with executive orders to withdraw half of our, let's say, strategic petroleum reserves. We cannot afford having, let's say, a policy that ignores sanctions on a country, for instance, like Iran, and just let that country, export as much as they want, because that undermines our foreign policy. And these radical changes of policies from administration to administration, which we had them since Obama administration to Trump, and then Trump to Biden administration, and maybe now the next administration, these huge radical shifts reduces U.S. reliability as a partner. Because if you want to rely, let's say Europe or Middle East, countries are allies in the Middle East, in the Gulf. If they want to rely on us and create a, let's say, long-term partnership with us in terms of energy investment or investment in the United States, industries, policy, foreign policy, if our policy and a strategy does not have continuity, the whole world have to sit and think, okay, now let's see who's next U.S. president, because we do not know the next president would still stay in Paris Agreement or is going to be radically shifting toward green. In the United States, we do not have agreement over net zero. Every country knows what is its concept. I mean, I would say every country, but like most of the countries with energy strategy, they know what is their understanding of net zero, what is their understanding of environmental policy, and they base their long-term policy based on that. But in US, we don't have that agreement. We have one president that left the Paris Agreement. We have one president that is like religiously, pushing our country in a rapid speed toward, ignoring like different resources we have. And I know many people in defense to Biden administration, they say that, but under Biden administration, our shale production increased to maximum. But I would say, first of all, companies in the United States are not really investing based on what presidents say. Yes, it impacts. Why? Because of investors. So for instance, if you have a president that say, I'm going to ban the fracking, or I'm giving incentives for investment in green, banks and whoever is allocating the funds will definitely shift that funds to where the incentive is, withdraw funds where there is, the limitations going to be. So that will happen on the movement of energies. But companies, when they want to decide, they look at their profit, they look at where the investment has happened, So yes, we have the highest production now, but where are we going tomorrow? So I think that regardless of president in the United States, we need to have a national understanding of what is our energy security strategy.
Right. So how do we move from shifting energy policies to a rational long-term energy vision and energy strategy? Like what change in our politics or our policy community is necessary to get to the point where we have this kind of stable energy vision?
I think first it comes with realization. First we have to understand, or our policymakers at every level, executive, and our Congress, the legislation, they have to come to this understanding that number one, energy is closely tied with our national security, with our defense, with our food security, with our economy. And the second is to understand and realize that not having that lack of national strategy, that rapid changes has been has been costly for us and can endanger our security in the future. Because every decision that has been made, we have every president doing good decisions. No president is just bad or no president is just good. Every president makes good decisions, and some decisions that we might not agree it's good. If the next president is going to undo that, what will be happening in all that money that has been invested in infrastructure? For instance, the EV mandate, we have billions of dollars invested, through incentives, direct incentives, indirect direct investment through creating all those infrastructure needed for our EV mandate. Now, if next president comes and say, no, that is not going to happen, all these infrastructural changes, if we need that much nuclear power plant, nuclear fuel, so we need to have that continuity in terms of investment, in terms of our strategy, and also the use of to that notion that what we want to do, what is our vision, where we want to go.
Right. May be difficult in the current political climate to have that discussion, but we're trying. Now you're going to host a panel coming up pretty soon
Yes.
On the topic of national energy strategy. Do you want to preview that?
Sure. So we have been working on actually on the draft of national energy strategy, that what it should be and how it could consist, because it's a very diverse, as we already tried to kind of touch upon all of them. Even we look at things like irregular energy warfare, and that how countries use different methods to threaten each other's energy security. So we are trying to, in this project, draft that, and then looking into and kind of kicking off that discourse in that panel, that why we need to have that national energy strategy, and how we can start, the ball rolling, talking to different stakeholders, include them, and try to have this. I like to mention something very interesting for me, that there was a video by President Trump last year. He had this discussion about integrating green energy into our defense system. And he was arguing that, in this video, he's saying that it was a speech he had, that, they came to me and asked me to have green, let's say, tank and jets, with green energy. Yeah. And I told them, well, we're sending those jets to kill people, our enemies, and devastate a country. But killing people, we don't care, or, is not a concern. But making sure that we leave that with environmentally clean or we don't leave any carbon footprint. This case is very interesting that he's making, that, the goal of, environmental policies, sustainability, is to preserve and sustain our resources, our earth, everything, our woods, forests, for our generations to come. Not to, destroy humanity, but make sure we destroy it in a way that is, environmentally friendly. There's no carbon footprint. And again, the other thing he said is, like, I asked them, what would be the difference, how the efficiency would change if we go green, let's say, green military. They said about 10-15%. And he's like, I answered them, the difference is shooting the other person or being shot. So, and that's also another aspect, that how closely energy and defense are tied together. So I'm not a fan of any radical side. I think that we need to produce and supply energy in a responsible way. I think I overlook some of the countries, again, like Saudi Arabia. It's really fascinating that how they both look on their resources, which is fossil fuel, but they are investing in a clean, sustainable future through, diversifying their sources, because we need to diversify that. We need new technologies, hydrogen. We need to work on fusion. We need solar. We need everything we can. I appreciate and I like the IRA, that the President Biden administration was working a lot on that, because that encourages investment in different in different types of technologies. But we should not forget that we need to have a balanced strategy. We cannot shift from one radical side to the other radical side.
Wow, Sara, this has been a fascinating discussion of all the intricacies of the energy issue. I'm sure there's much more that we could say, and I'm sure that we will say more when we get closer to your panel and start talking about the strategy that you've drafted. I would love to get in the details of that with a future episode, so I hope that you'll come back.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Okay. Well, this has been the IWP podcast with our guest, Dr. Sara Vakhshouri, talking about national energy strategy. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time.
If you like our podcast and would like to hear more, please subscribe. And if you are interested in learning more about the topics we covered here today and want to be a student at IWP, go to iwp.edu and click Apply Now.